I'm only in verse 1. Bear with me. In verse 2, and there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba. So when they had called him to David, the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" He said, "At your service." Then the king said, "Is there not still someone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God?" And Ziba said to the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan who is lame in his feet." So the king said to him, "Where is he?" And Ziba said to the king, "Indeed, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, in Lodabar." Then King David sent and brought him out of the house of Machir to the son of Ammiel from Lodabar. The king sent for him. Now place yourself in the context of Mephibosheth. You know, Mr. M. He's been on the run. He's got a son of his own, Scripture tells us. He's been on the run 20 plus years. The knock finally comes to the door, and they've come for him. He knows in his mind that it would be execution time. That's the way that it works. That's what would be deserving. And so it would be a long ride, a long transportation time from Lodabar back to Jerusalem, knowing that this is the end. The king has summoned, and we're finally going to get what we deserve. We don't always get what we deserve when we walk with the king. A king who knows us by name. A king who knocks on our door. And if you may be here today, and I hope you did not come to be entertained today, because I have nothing to entertain you with. But I am sharing with you about a God in heaven who knows you by name. And He has sent a messenger today to send a messenger to you into your house. That today could be the day of your salvation. You expect judgment. You've been sitting in Lodabar. You've been sitting in the midst of your shame. And I know a God who's sending a message to you today to come dine at my table. Verse 6. Now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face and prostrated himself. Do we have a photo? I like this for visual learners. He can't walk. He's lame in both his feet. He enters the room, bandaged perhaps to protect his feet, using crutches or something, but finding a king with a different kind of welcome than what he had thought about. He answered, "Here is your servant." In verse 7, David said to him, "Do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake, and will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you will eat bread at my table continually." Then he bowed himself and said, "What is your servant that you should look upon such a dead dog as I?" He sees himself as a dead dog. And I'm afraid that some of us sometimes, and we come from a place of shame, and perhaps we see ourselves as a dead dog. Yeah, you believe positionally that you're a child of God. But practically, you're not able to do what I'm asking and challenging you to do as a messenger today, because you see yourself as still a dead dog. That's the way he sees himself. He's not understanding what is unfolding here as he gets an invitation, not an execution, but an invitation from the king. In verse 9, And the king called to Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, I have given to your master's son all that belonged to Saul and to all his house. You therefore and your sons and your servants shall work the land for him, and you shall bring in the harvest, that your master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's son, shall eat bread at my table always. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. In verse 11, Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king has commanded his servant, so will your servant do. As for Mephibosheth, said the king, he shall eat at my table like one of the king's sons. And Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all who dwelt in the house of Ziba were servants of Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, for he ate continually at the king's table, and he was lame in both his feet. Four times, David says, you're going to eat at my table always. Like one of the king's sons, a son or a daughter. You may think for a moment, well, I read that, Pastor, and thank you for that word, but that's an old story. It's an old story, but you read Scripture, you read all of these books, they're all directing us toward this new covenant relationship that we'll celebrate here at the end of this message. All pointing to a God who loves us, wants relationship with us, sends Christ to the cross for us. It's a foreshadowing. David, a Christ likeness, represented here, the king. The king. You see, we're all Mephibosheth, and that we are all spiritually crippled. We're all a bit lame in our feet. Romans 3:23, Paul tells us we've all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That just as Mephibosheth was seen as an enemy of the state, an enemy of the king, even though that wasn't what played out, but Paul tells us in Romans 5:10, while we were enemies, that Jesus went to the cross for his enemies. And that Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. And just like a dead dog, we're dead in our trespasses of sin. Paul tells us that in Ephesians chapter 2. But it's by grace you've been saved through faith. Not of our own doing, it's a gift of God, not a result of works, that no one may boast. You see, we get what we don't deserve. It's an invitation from the King to speak into our shame and to speak into our brokenness. You see, we are sons and daughters of the King. It's humbling, and you think, well, that's overwhelming. It is overwhelming because it accomplishes what you and I could not accomplish for ourselves. But the God who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, who is still speaking and still directing and still speaking into the lives of lame people, the Mephibosheths that may be in this room today, coming from a place of shame. What does it look like to walk in shame? Shame is like this. Shame is the feeling that I'm just not good enough. Author Brené Brown, in the book Daring, she said, shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Shame looks like this, and that we're not good enough. Guilt says it this way. Guilt, I've done something bad, but shame says, I'm just bad. Guilt says, I should not have said it that way. And shame says, I'm just a jerk. Guilt says, I should not have looked at that. And shame says, I'm a dirty pervert. Guilt says, I should not have taken that. And shame says, I'm just a thief. Shame is having your spouse leave you for someone else. Shame is being arrested for driving under the influence. Shame is being called out in the staff meeting in front of your coworkers. Shame is losing your temper with your kids. Shame is infertility, being unable to have children. Shame is adultery. Shame is divorce. Shame is sexual immorality. Shame is filing for bankruptcy. Shame is losing your home or your business. Shame is having your credit or debit card decline when you're trying to pay for the group. Shame is not having a date for the school dance and never having your house clean enough. It's the lens, it can become the lens that we see ourselves through. We see ourselves, we're never going to be enough for our parents, and never enough for our kids or our spouse or our friends. It's shame that thrives in isolation. It leaves us emotionally distant from those who would be closest to us. It causes us and allows us to be full of rage and to get mad and irritated. We're never fully present because we're always focused upon ourselves, and our heart and our mind dwell on this, and it tells us that this is who we really are. Positionally, child of God. Practically, mind, heart filled with shame, living in Lodabar. But perhaps hearing the invitation of the King. Come and dine at my table. And dine at my table not once, but always. Always, forever, in this life and in the next.